Okay, in this video we're going to talk about how to solve quadratic equations by factoring. And this is just one method for solving quadratic equations. And this is only whenever it's convenient to factor. Only if you're good at factoring can you really use this one. The steps go as follows. The first thing we always want to do is we want to write it in the form, the quadratic equation, in the form ax squared plus bx plus c is equal to 0. So in other words, we're going to move everything to the one side of the equal sign and we're going to make it equal to 0. So in this case, the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to subtract 24 from both sides, because right now I have terms on both sides of the equal sign. I don't want that. If I subtract 24 from both sides, I have x squared plus 5x, and now I'm minus 24 on the left, and on the right-hand side of the equal sign, I'm going to have a 0. So notice, general form, it's set equal to 0, just like I want, and I go x squared, then the x, then no x at all, decreasing powers of x. I've written in the general form. Now if I look at this, I can factor this equation, and if you don't know how to factor, that's a separate video. We don't want to talk about necessarily factoring here because we've got better things to do. So if I want to factor this out, it turns out that this factors out into x plus 8, x minus 3 is equal to 0. And there's your factoring. If that's trouble for you, you need to go look at some other videos, find some other resources, right? We've been doing a lot of that in class though. Well, the only way that this can work, and if you watched the last video, you know where I'm going with this, the only way that this can work is if either the x plus 8 is equal to 0, or if the x minus 3 chunk is equal to 0. That's the only way this can happen, because I need to have 0 times something is equal to 0, or something times 0 is equal to 0, the 0 product rule. Solving for x in the left one, I subtract 8 from both sides, and I end up with x can be negative 8. Or, if I add 3 to both sides on the right-hand side, x can be equal to 3. So there's two numbers that will give me a 0 for this equation, and that is, then, my solutions. X is equal to 3 or negative 8. Now, I can always go through and check, and it'd be very simple to do so. Let's check for the 3, and I could do this at both numbers, which is what I'd want to do. But if I put a 3 into the equation, I want to know, is that correct? So, in order to check my answer, I would do something like this. Notice my use of parentheses. 3 squared plus 5 times 3, is that really equal to 24? 3 squared is 9. 5 times 3 is 15. So what I'm really asking is 9 plus 15 really 24? And we know that it is. So it all checks out. And if I did the same thing with negative 8, I should find out that that's the case. 24 equals 24 in the end. Okay, let's go over here. Let's do a different one. Same kind of problem though, right? Step 1, let's move everything to the same side of the equal sign. I would suggest keeping your x squared as a positive thing, so I'm going to move the 11x to the left and the 10 to the left. That means I need to subtract 11x from both sides. I'm also going to add 10 to both sides. That way I get rid of everything in one step. So I have on the left an x squared minus 11x plus 10. On the right I have a 0. Now it becomes a factoring problem. If I look at that, if I know my factoring rules, I know that that ends up being x minus 10, x minus 1 is equal to 0. So my two solutions are going to be found when either an x minus 10 is equal to 0, or an x minus 1 is equal to 0. That's the only way that that can happen. If the first chunk is a 0 or the second chunk is a 0. So solving for x, I would add 10 to both sides. X can be 10. Or x can be 1. Two solutions, x is equal to 1 and x is equal to 10. Now we come across a very important property before we go any farther, and that is this. When you solve an equation that has x to the first power, there is one solution. When you solve an equation that has x squared, there are two solutions. Now it's kind of tricky. We're not going to end up with two unique numbers all the time. But that's something to keep in mind, is that we're looking for two answers within all of these problems. If that makes sense, then we're ready to go on to problems that you can't factor. So we're going to learn a new method called completing the square, and that's the next video.